Hello, hello, hello. How's it going? Welcome to another moment in time for everything and nothing. I hope you're doing well. I hope you've been doing amazing. I hope life has been treating you kind. And I hope that if you are going through any challenge or any rough moment, that you are able to remember that you're not alone. That many of us are going through similar challenges. And I'm not saying that to diminish what you're feeling or what you're going through. I'm sharing that to remind you that life is an interesting experience, in my opinion. And the challenges that are part of it are always going to be there in different ways, shapes, or forms. There's, I remember one time I was sharing with someone that something bad had happened. And I was telling them, this bad thing happened to me. And their response was, well, at least it wasn't this other thing because that's worse. I never really liked that type of answer or mentality because in my opinion, in my world, pain is pain. If it hurts a little or if it hurts a lot, it's still pain. And some people may disagree and some people may say, well, no, there's people out there that are really suffering, you're not suffering. But how do we measure that? How do we decide whose pain is worth more than others? I always wonder that. And my answer is I don't. If you're hurting because you lost your favorite pencil or your favorite item, or if you're hurting because you're going through a breakup, or if you're hurting because a loved one just transitioned, pain is pain. And everyone experiences differently. And none of us really have a right to determine whose pain is worth more or is more than the others. I'm going to start doing a series, and it starts today with this episode with the human side of innovation at work. And the reason I'm doing that is it goes hand in hand with the book that I wrote, No Risk, No Fun, the human side of innovation in insurance. And interestingly enough, this morning as I was getting ready to record this specific podcast, I got a little reminder. So I get messages and notifications. That's what I get. Notifications, reminders from Harvard Business Review. I've been a member of their magazine for I don't know how long, since I can remember. I graduated university back in 2008. And I started reading those magazines, and I used to keep all the hard copies. I'm one of those people that I subscribed and I would get the copies and I had them all on a shelf. And it was really tricky because when I moved from Germany to England and from England to Canada, I actually carried all those magazines. And my husband at the time, he was a big National Geographic and Wired reader. So we had all of these magazines that we were carrying around. It was hilarious, just all the things that we packed with us. But my point is, I got this notification this morning about an article that was posted or published on HBR, and it said something along the lines of faking enthusiasm is exhausting. Here's some ways to work around it. And I laughed. I laughed because it was very coincidental that as I was preparing for this recording, I knew that I was going to talk about this myth of work-life balance. And since I can remember as a coach, I keep hearing when I would sit with my clients, especially executives and top managers, they would sit with me and say, I just really want work-life balance. And then that became a bit of a marketing trend where everybody was talking about work-life balance, and then I would hear it in the meetings with HR about, in different jobs that I worked at, and also in different organizations where I was a coach at. The talent, now they're called talent, and or people and talent, and but in the other times it was, in some places it's still called human resources. They talked a lot about, finding work-life balance. And I started telling people there is no work-life balance. And that's what I want to talk about today. My perspective on this myth of work-life balance, the myth around it, the lie, the misconception, and the misery that comes with it. And this is based on what I've experienced. And it basically goes like this. And I saw it especially in innovation too. So in any area in the workplace where I communicated, where I got to observe, where I got to be part of conversations, when people talked about this work-life balance, all I could see was suffering, literally. I'll give you an example. If it was the executives or the top managers, they would come and tell me how they wanted work-life balance because, and they would say something along the lines of, at work I have to be this. At work I have a team I have to lead, and people are looking up to me to make decisions. And, there's these employees, and there's the board, or, the people that are expecting results for me, and I have to be this way, and, I need to earn the respect from these other people that I'm leading. And then when I go home, it's exhausting because, I have kids, and, or my wife just had a baby, and we have this little newborn. And the more I would listen to these stories, the more I realized there's this fragmentation, and people are putting themselves in different squares, in different boxes, to behave in certain ways at certain places at certain times. And another story that I share very often when I'm introducing myself is that when I first started doing executive coaching, I was younger, a lot younger. And I used to work with usually men that were a lot older than me. I was around 28, and they were already, 30s, 50s. And yeah, 40s, 50s. And they would say stuff. I remember one specific one. I'm not going to say all of them did, because it wasn't all of them that did it. There was this one guy, this one man, who came up to me and said, my name is so and so. And I said, nice to meet you. My name is Yvette. I'm here as a coach. I'm an intercultural coach. And I work a lot with executives. And he said, well, just so you know, I don't need a coach. And I said, okay. And he said, and also, I'm not going to talk about my feelings. I'm not here to cry or talk about any of that stuff. And I said, well, that's good, because I'm not a therapist. I'm not a counselor. I'm literally here to coach. And the whole point of this conversation is to talk about intercultural communications, what to consider when you're doing business in Mexico and Spain, Spanish speaking countries mainly. And at the time also the US, because I had lived in the US for so long. And he made it very, very clear that he did not want to talk about feelings, and he wasn't going to talk about feelings. And I'll always remember that. And I always share that story because he said, I don't even want to be here. And I told him, you don't have to. I'm going to get paid anyway. So you don't have to be here. We can go talk to your sponsor, and they've already paid for this package. They might assign someone else, but this is pretty much it. So long story short, he sat down and he said, okay, well, let's start. What do you want to know? And I just told him, well, I just want to really understand, where are you at right now in terms of projects, negotiations that you're doing, and just, if you could just give me a a summary. So he started talking about it, talking about how he had been doing a lot of negotiations in Mexico and how he was going there and how he couldn't understand why every time he goes there, this person that he was meeting with kept insisting that they go out to dinner and that he was going to bring his mom and his wife. And he was getting annoyed. He was like, I don't understand why this person wants to bring that into this business, you know, meetings, because that's business. So I was explaining to him the difference between in the culture in some people. Not all Mexicans are the same. I'm not saying that, but at the time I was telling him that it's common that if someone really likes you and they feel like they're developing a connection and a relationship with you, that they'll want to, after work, go out, and if they already have meeting, an arrangement with their family, that it's okay to introduce you to them so that they can bring you closer. That's actually a good sign. And I remember him, he was saying, he was saying, he was not, he was not fully understanding it, but he was open to it. As we went on with the session, he then started using words like, well, it feels weird. It feels this, it feels that. And he caught himself saying the word feel. And he looked at me, he's like, I'm talking about my feelings, aren't I? And I started laughing. I started laughing because I told him, even if you don't want to, when we talk about situations and we start understanding what is happening, especially when you're interacting with people, we are going to talk about feelings. We're going to talk about how you feel. We're going to talk about even what you think. We're going to talk about how you notice people's behaviors. And all of those things have to do with the fact that we're dealing with human beings. We're dealing with other people. And I remember at that moment, I realized the more these people were trying to divide themselves and put themselves in, but this is work and this is personal life. I began to decide for myself that I was not going to have this work and life separate thing, because it didn't make sense to me. What I was experiencing, what I knew, what it meant for me was, I have a life. This is my life. And there's almost like I could visualize there's an Beth standing and there's life all around. And there are different areas that are meaningful and that are important in my life. And those areas change in time. When I was 16, the areas that mattered to me in my life were not work, not office work, at least. At 16, I used to be a babysitter. I used to get paid to babysit. So, but I didn't see it as work. I saw it as this amazing opportunity to spend time with kids, because I really like to hang out with kids and play. And uh, when I was, 19, I had a job as a Taekwondo instructor, but I didn't see it as a career. It was a job. In my 20s, when I worked at the women's shelter, I didn't see that as a job. That was my purpose. So, what I'm saying with this is, what you call those areas and how you define those areas of life that matter to you will differ as life changes. And that's, of course, okay. And that's how I see what we're experiencing. There is an area called work or career or profession. There is an area of relationships. There is an area of your health, physical health, and you can even divide that into other branches: your mental health, your emotional sanity, stability. And you can actually choose what those are. So when I started coaching, years ago. And many life coaches use this tool is we use our life wheel. In this life wheel, we determine what are the areas that matter to us. And you can put what it is. Some people it's finances, some people it's relationship with children and the relationship with family into different areas. What I'm getting at is work has always been a part of life. And when the lockdowns happened, it became very obvious how work was a part of life because as we all shifted and we all had to work from home, where our life is, where our personal experiences are, work came in there. So if that was happening, hello, what's not to say or who's not to say that all the other previous years, everyone that was talking about this work-life balance, of course, when you went to work, you carried your life into work, if that theory did exist, which in my world, it doesn't. It's life. And what happens in one area will impact other areas. Meaning what happens if you have a tough conversation at home with your children, that's going to impact how you show up at work. And some people may want to separate those instances so much that they'll want to suppress the feelings of one or exaggerate the opposite at the workplace just to appear, quote unquote, balance. When in reality, what we're doing is we're creating a lot more imbalance and a lot more pain. The thing that no one likes to talk about. Or the thing that people say, well, this is nothing. There's other people out there that are suffering more. Whatever. At one point or another, it all catches up. So this whole idea of life-work balance, in my opinion, it just doesn't work for me. And using that as an example in innovation, I tell people, if you are here and you want to be creative, but you live in an environment at home where creativity is laughed at, whether it's by your parents, because sometimes I work with students, or whether it is by your children, because sometimes the people I work with have teenagers or young adults that will make fun of their parents and be like, oh, dad, you're stupid, or oh, mom, what are you talking about? And then the parents, of course, don't want to do that because they want to come across as, well, no, that's not what I meant, or trying to like retain or build a good relationship with their young ones over there. Or you may have a spouse that is just sometimes abusive, and they'll make comments and they'll laugh, and so if that's the environment we have at home, naturally, when you're at home, you can't be that creative person. And in innovation, we want creativity, we want curiosity, we want wild conversations, because that is how we get to solutions. That is how we are able to explore different perspectives, and that is how we make living life fun, in my opinion. And so it makes it really challenging. It makes it challenging to want to keep being an innovative and wanting to fuel that creative self, that creative part of you when you don't have that support at home. Or vice versa. Maybe at home you're completely creative and everybody's like, yay, this is fun. And then you play with your kids, whatever age they are, and you guys are always joking, and creativity is just part of your everyday conversations. But then you're supposed to be an innovator, and your bosses or your decision makers are just not having it. Because that's not what innovation is. Innovation is supposed to be about making money. And that just will totally crush that part of creativity, almost like they did it back in elementary school, sometimes even kindergarten, where the teachers would tell us to stop daydreaming and focus, stop coloring outside the boxes, stop coloring outside the pictures, don't make an elephant that color, that's not real. All of those little things are the things that have crushed who we are and who we've become. And I say it has crushed who we've become because we have become people that are fragmented, people that are wanting to be accept it, therefore we behave a certain way in certain moments, but we're not being who we are. We're not really being honest to ourselves. We're satisfying other people's needs and wants and expectations at the cost of the relationship that we have with ourselves. And it makes it harder then for us to trust ourselves because we're constantly criticizing ourselves. We're constantly punishing ourselves. We're constantly diminishing ourselves. So I'm going to leave you with, as I'm kickstarting this whole series of the human side of innovation at work and life and what that is, I'm going to leave it at that because I covered a lot about just the myth. Just reflect on that idea. And right now it has shifted a lot again, as I said, because we work a lot from home. It's become a lot more blended, a lot more like, okay, well, where do you draw the line? And it makes sense that it's doing that. We have life. Work just happens to be part of it. And yes, I'll say it. I said it a lot during the lockdowns was employers colleagues needed to take time to say, I am grateful that we were allowed in your home. I am grateful that we were able to, that you gave us a chance to go in, to continue doing the work, because now it became a disruption for a lot of people, especially at the beginning when it was hard. And I know, I'm telling you from experience, it was hard to differentiate when to get off the phone and when to continue on the phone, because now you were at home the whole time. So who cares if you took a call at 9 p.m.? But then your kids, if you had kids, or your pets, if you had pets, or if you were a caretaker of someone, how did that interfere? It was a big adjustment for a lot of people. And a lot of people didn't want to talk about these things or didn't want to acknowledge those things because it's uncomfortable. And it's only uncomfortable because for a long time, people were going around talking about the life-work balance, separating the two. There is no separation. There is no separation, in my perspective. Again, you don't have to agree with me. This is just the way I see it. And if you are going through some rough moments and situations and experiences, you might agree with me, because those moments, those experiences, those situations will impact other areas in your life. And one of them is work. And that's why it matters. And that's why it's important. And that's why I have a big problem with HR departments who claim to be very caring about their people, but they still refer it as life-work balance, because that is a lie. We care about you. We want you to breathe. We want you to do good things. We have all of these initiatives, but don't do it at work. This is work time. And you're still expected to deliver X, Y, Z. Oh, and something bad happened to you in your personal life, that stays home. This is work. I'm thinking, okay, that whole marketing thing does not work. Either you genuinely care about the people and you genuinely care about their human experiences and you genuinely care about their life, or you don't. That's my opinion. So, with that being said, yeah, I'm going to invite you to reflect on what that means to you. I will continue the conversation, of course, and talk about different areas. We can talk about different areas, how they're all connected, how they're all impacted with each other. And I leave you with how I respect my life. The little Band-Aid. So if you're watching on the video, I have a Band-Aid on my head. If you're listening just on the podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, because those are the only ones I do for audio, you won't see it. But if you want to, let me just share with you. I have a Band-Aid on my head, and it's a small Band-Aid now. 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, I had a big patch on it. And I still do weekly videos on my social media, Facebook and Instagram. And so you see them there. I went through all different sizes of patches. And what I'm getting at with that is I had conversations with people that would tell me, clearly, you're not going to go on a work call or a client call with that thing on your head. And I'm thinking, of course I am. What am I supposed to do with it? Hide it? Put a wig on? Put a hat on? First of all, I tried putting a hat, not to hide it, but I was outside working in the sun. It didn't work. It hurt. What ended up, the reason why I have this is I had a cyst that needed to be removed. And it just so happened it's like right at the hairline. And they had to make a hole, they had to make a cut, and they have to pull everything out. I won't go into details because some people I know are sensitive, and I'm mindful of that. Point of the story, I have a hole on my head, and I had to cover it. And it's a weird space because I have a lot of hair. So I have to just put a bunch of band-aids on. Underneath this band-aid is another tiny band-aid covering, because now it's the gash is closing, so it's getting smaller. But what I'm getting at is, yes, I will show up comfortably with a patch on my head. And I won't apologize for it. I'll introduce it to people and say, I'll talk about the elephant in the room, which is right on my head. And I do that on the calls. I do that when I go meet people in person because they'll look at me a little weird. And I tell them, oh, the thing, I'll tell you what it is. And I'll give them as much or as little detail as they want. That is life. And being able to do that allows me to continue to do my job, allows me to show up, allows my healing process to be better, smoother. Not to mention, I have a big dog that just had knee surgery. So my going out, my in-person meetings right now are a lot more limited than they were 3 weeks ago because I'm watching her. I need to make sure that her healing goes well. And I don't want to just leave her in a crate, a lot, 20, 12 hours. Like I want her to, she sleeps in a crate already because she needs to heal her knee. That is life. And I'm not going to apologize for it, and I'm not going to feel ashamed for it. This is who I am. And the more I accept my life, and the more I love my life, and the areas around my life, the better I show up at different areas in my life, in my relationships, my friendships, my work, with my clients, and of course, with myself. So there you have it. Yvette's opinion of work-life balance, the myth, throwing it out, and my perspective on the beauty of life. I'll share more on another episode. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your support. And until next time.